The sirens weren't supposed to scream here. Not on a quiet colony like Vespera 9, not in a town where the biggest excitement was the monthly cattle roundup. But tonight the screams came from the medbay, and they weren't from sirens anymore. They came from Liam Cross, a 17-year-old kid, shattered and broken on the ground while a Galactic officer laughed over him, boots still stained with blood. The officer didn't know he had just picked the worst possible kid to break. He didn't know that Liam's father wasn't just some retired farmer. He didn't know he had woken up something the galaxy had spent decades trying to forget. And by the time he realized it, it would already be too late. 3 days earlier, Liam was running late. His hoverboard skidded across the dirt road, kicking up a cloud of dust as he raced toward the market square. His dad, Daniel, had given the usual lecture that morning, a gentle reminder to stay clear of the new Galactic Enforcer patrols. Vespera 9 had always been Earth-administered, but after the trade accords, the Galactic Authority decided it needed a stronger presence in fringe settlements. Which meant shiny ships, stiff uniforms, and officers who thought a badge gave them the right to stomp on everyone smaller than them. Liam didn't worry about it too much. The officers mostly stuck to the starport, flexing for incoming traders. Locals kept their heads down, grumbled over their beers, and waited for them to get bored and move on. But something shifted that week. Officers started setting up arbitrary checkpoints. They issued fines for suspicious movement. They arrested farmers for driving unregistered tractors. And when Liam cut through the central square to deliver a shipment of spare parts, he caught his first real glimpse of Officer Veric. Veric was a mountain in armor, sneering at a man half his size who was pleading over a citation. When the man hesitated to sign the ticket, Veric grabbed him by the collar and slammed him against a market stall hard enough to crack the wooden frame. Liam's hands clenched instinctively, but he told himself to walk on. This wasn't his fight. His dad had drilled it into him since he could walk, survive first, fight later. And yet, as he passed, Veric shoved the old man to the ground and laughed. Something snapped. Without thinking, Liam turned and muttered loud enough for the officer to hear. "Real tough, beating up farmers. Bet you feel like a hero." The square went silent. Even the merchants, who usually barked over customers, froze mid-shout. Veric's eyes, tiny and mean, locked onto Liam's. For a second, Liam thought he might just get yelled at. Maybe fined. Maybe banned from the square for a week. Instead, Veric took 2 steps forward and swung. The first punch broke Liam's jaw. He didn't even remember falling, just a brutal shockwave that left him seeing stars. Then came the boot. And another. And another. Ribs cracked. Arms twisted the wrong way. His leg buckled with a sickening snap. It felt like falling forever, deeper into a pit he couldn't crawl out of, as the crowd stared in horror and fear. No one moved. No one called for help. In the authorities' eyes, speaking up would only make them next. By the time the medics arrived, called anonymously from somewhere inside a merchant's booth, Liam was barely conscious. His body didn't feel like a body anymore. It felt like rubble. Like ruins. In the brief moments he was aware, he heard the officer mutter something about showing Earthlings their place, before stepping over him like trash on the sidewalk. When Daniel Cross arrived at the medbay, they almost didn't let him in. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He simply looked at the doctor, a young man clearly terrified to be treating a galactic authority incident, and said in a voice as quiet as falling snow, "Move." The doctor moved. Daniel stood at the side of the bed, looking down at Liam's battered form. His boy's face was nearly unrecognizable beneath the swelling and bruises. Machines beeped weakly, stitching together broken bones and collapsed lungs as best they could. Daniel took it all in without speaking, the weight of it pressing him down into the sterile floor. He stayed there a long time. Long enough for the nurses to pretend he wasn't there, long enough for the shifts to change. Long enough for the anger to shift from a hot, roaring fire into something far colder. Sharper. More dangerous. In the dead of night, Daniel left the medbay without a word. He didn't go home. He didn't go to the authorities. He went to a place he hadn't visited in years, a place buried under the sands beyond the farming fields, marked only by a weathered stone no one looked twice at. He knelt at the base of the stone and brushed away the dirt, revealing a hidden hatch. Inside was a container older than Liam himself, packed with relics from a life Daniel had promised himself he would never touch again. A battered operations tablet blinked weakly to life when he thumbed the hidden power switch. It requested a biometric scan. Daniel pressed his thumb against the scanner. Gravewalker, identity confirmed. Status, retired. Clearance, black. The screen flashed one more message before it settled into operational mode. Welcome back, Commander Cross. Daniel didn't smile. Didn't feel satisfaction. Only a hollow certainty. They had tried to hurt his family. They thought they could crush Earth's legacy like it was nothing. They thought the old ghosts of humanity's deadliest operatives would stay buried forever. They thought wrong. As Daniel loaded the weapons into his old rucksack and fitted the lightweight armor plates beneath his worn rancher's jacket, a cold wind swept across the dunes. Far off toward the colony, he could see the lights of the gala preparations, banners raised, speeches rehearsed, officials laughing into crystal glasses under the protection of men like Veric. Daniel pulled a small device from the locker, a beacon transmitter long out of use. With a click, he activated it. Somewhere deep in the orbital satellite network, an old ghost stirred to life, flagging Daniel Cross as active. Across the galaxy, hidden eyes noticed the signal. And smiled. They had missed the Gravewalker. But for the Galactic Authority on Vespera 9? Their nightmare was just beginning. The desert at night was a cold, hollow place, filled only with the soft hiss of shifting sands and the occasional whisper of far-off wildlife. Daniel moved like a ghost through it, the old instincts sliding back into place with terrifying ease. Each step toward town tightened the coil inside him, that old hunter's patience returning sharper and colder than before. His body might have aged, his hands might have seen the work of peaceful farming seasons, but the mind behind them was the same one that had once ended wars before breakfast. It had taken years to bury Gravewalker beneath layers of dust and normalcy. Tonight, he was scraping it all away. As he approached the edge of town, Daniel activated a microdrone from the kit strapped to his belt. It zipped high into the night sky, silent and invisible to all but the highest-grade military sensors. The drone fed live information back into his old ops tablet, mapping out the patrols, checkpoints, and strongholds set up by the Galactic Authority. They weren't just flexing muscle anymore. They had turned the town into an occupied zone, posted in towers, rooftops, even around the medbay where Liam slept. Daniel's jaw tightened as he scanned the layout. They were scared. That was good. Fear made people sloppy. He watched as Officer Veric and his squad lounged in the town's old council hall, drinking and laughing like conquering heroes. Around them, civilians moved like ghosts, heads down, shoulders tight. Daniel knew that look. Occupied people. Broken people. And it burned hotter than any fire inside him. But rage didn't win wars. Precision did. He forced himself to stay detached, to file away faces, patrol schedules, access points, and guard rotations with clinical detachment. Every insult. Every injustice. Every sneer from the uniformed thugs who thought they ruled here now. All of it went into the file in his mind, to be used later like a knife in the dark. Back at his hideout beneath the dunes, Daniel spread the gathered intel across a holographic display. His fingers danced across the tablet's interface, marking targets, prioritizing threats, setting up automated distraction protocols. He wasn't just going to fight them. He was going to dismantle them piece by piece, until every last man wearing that uniform realized too late that they had invited death to dinner and given it a front-row seat. The first step was information. He hacked into the patrol net using a bypass code so old it wasn't even recognized by the latest encryption updates. Within minutes, he was listening in on officer chatter. The arrogance was nauseating. They bragged about how easy it was to bully Earth-born settlers, about how primitive the colony was compared to the core worlds, about how no one would miss a few bruised farmers or crippled kids. Daniel closed his eyes for a moment, letting the bow settle. Not yet. Not yet. Instead, he started slipping subtle changes into the patrol system, redirecting units into dead-end alleys, causing system errors that glitched communication between squads, deleting security footage at critical checkpoints, making them just uncertain enough to second-guess their surroundings but not enough to realize they were under attack. Yet. Meanwhile, Daniel paid a visit to an old friend. Sarah operated a rundown parts shop on the edge of the industrial quarter, a cover she wore like a second skin. She didn't flinch when Daniel appeared from the shadows behind her loading dock, just arched one eyebrow and said, "I was wondering when you'd stop playing dead." He told her what happened. Told her about Liam. About Veric. About the spineless authority officers who turned a blind eye to real crimes while punishing innocent colonists. Sarah listened in silence, cleaning a dismantled energy rifle with long, deliberate strokes. When he finished, she placed the rifle on the table and smiled without humor. "So," she said, "you want to burn the house down?" Daniel shook his head. "I want them to tear it down themselves." Sarah laughed, the sound low and dangerous. "Welcome back, Commander." Together, they planned the first strike. Nothing flashy. Nothing that would draw heavy reinforcements from the core planets. Just enough to rattle the Enforcers' confidence, to make them look like fools in front of the people they were trying to oppress. The first night, Daniel disabled every patrol vehicle on the eastern perimeter using old-school sabotage techniques. A little sugar in the intake valves, a few well-placed EMP charges masked as electrical shorts. By morning, half the authorities' ground forces were scrambling for rides while the colonists watched from windows and rooftops with barely concealed smirks. The second night, he planted fake evidence in Veric's quarters suggesting the officer was skimming off the fines collected from settlers. Daniel made sure the anonymous tips filtered into the ears of Veric's own men, who already grumbled about getting stiffed on hazard pay. Seeds of doubt. Seeds of chaos. The third night, Sarah struck. From a rooftop across the square, she sent a sniper round through the communications relay hub, crippling the Enforcer's ability to coordinate across the town. No casualties. No warning. Just a slow, creeping realization that they weren't in control anymore. Meanwhile, Daniel left little calling cards. At every strike site, he planted Old Earth Special Forces patches, the insignia of units long since disbanded and mythologized into legends across the galaxy. Messages scrawled in acid on walls. "The Earth you forgot remembers you. You broke the wrong bones. Gravewalker walks." It worked faster than Daniel had hoped. The officers grew paranoid. They accused each other of leaks. Veric lashed out, beating two of his own men in a drunken rage. Civilians, emboldened by the cracks forming in the authorities' armor, started slipping food and supplies to Daniel's hidden caches without being asked. The tide was shifting. Fear was a powerful thing, but hope wielded by the right hands could be lethal. Still, Daniel knew it wasn't enough to rattle the underlings. He needed Veric. He needed him scared, exposed, desperate. Because only then would the mask crack wide open for everyone to see the coward underneath the armor. The opportunity came sooner than expected. On the fifth night, the authority announced a public demonstration to restore order, ordering all citizens to gather in the main square under penalty of arrest. It was the perfect setup. Veric wanted a show. Daniel was about to give him one. In the old ruins north of town, Daniel and Sarah prepared the final bait. They spread rumors through the underground network, hints that a rebel leader would be meeting contacts there at midnight. It wasn't even subtle. It didn't have to be. Veric was arrogant enough to think he could crush the rebellion himself, and parade the capture around the square like a trophy. As Daniel double-checked the traps hidden in the ruins, remote-triggered EMPs, signal scramblers, low-grade stun charges calibrated for maximum confusion, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. The ruins creaked and groaned with every gust of night wind, ancient beams rattling under the weight of 100 years of neglect. Veric led his squad deeper inside, his boots crunching over shattered stone and rusted metal. He barked orders into the dark, voice full of false bravado, but his hands never strayed far from his weapon. The men within were jumpy, eyes flicking to every shadow, flinching at every crack of distant movement. Somewhere in the black maze above them, Daniel moved unseen, one step ahead, setting the stage. Every loose board, every crumbling column, every puddle of stagnant water became a weapon in his hands. The first trap was simple, almost laughably so. A tripwire stretched low across a hallway entrance, hidden beneath debris. One of the younger officers stormed forward without looking and hit it at full stride. Instantly, a net of high-tensile microfilament launched from the ceiling, tangling him midair and slamming him against a pillar with a solid thud. Before the others could react, a low-frequency screamer went off, rattling their comms and scrambling their headsets into incoherent static. Panic spread like wildfire. Officers barked over each other, their commands lost in a soup of distortion and white noise. Daniel watched through the thermal scope, picking his moments. A stun charge, placed carefully in a fallen vent shaft, blew out the lights, plunging the ruins into pitch darkness. Someone opened fire blindly, plasma bolts tearing through walls and ceilings, hitting nothing but shadows. Veric roared for order, shoving one of his own men aside to seize control, but the squad had already broken into chaotic clusters, each believing an unseen enemy lurked in every corner. Daniel dropped down a level without a sound, boots landing softly on a cracked stone floor. He moved like a wraith through the smoke and darkness, brushing past terrified officers who never even knew he was there. Here, a silent flick of a knife to sever power cables on their weapons. There, a quick adjustment to an air vent to feed smoke directly into their gathering points. He wasn't fighting them. He was dissolving them. Piece by piece. Mind by mind. In the center of the chaos, Veric stumbled into the open courtyard of the ruins, backlit by the sickly flicker of damaged floodlights. He spun in a slow circle, weapon raised, cursing and threatening the invisible enemy he still refused to believe was real. Daniel waited, perched on the balcony above, watching, calculating. Veric was exposed. Vulnerable. But not yet broken. That would come soon enough. From the far side of the ruins, Daniel triggered a pre-recorded message through a battered comm unit, looping it into every open frequency the officers still clung to. The voice was calm, cold, familiar to anyone who had studied military history. It was the voice of Gravewalker, the ghost from Earth's forgotten wars. "You hurt my son," it said, clear as a gunshot in the smoke. "Now you answer to me." The reaction was immediate. Officers froze, eyes wide with terror. Some dropped their weapons altogether, backing away from the source of the voice as if expecting death to fall from the sky. Veric snarled, trying to rally them, but the fear had already set in too deep. Authority badges meant nothing when legends came calling. In a final act of desperation, Veric activated his emergency beacon, signaling for reinforcements from the nearby orbital garrison. It was a move Daniel had counted on. 10 minutes later, sleek black dropships roared over the ruins, disgorging a new threat: bounty hunters. Not authority officers, not proper soldiers. Mercenaries. Killers. Hired scum who would fight for the highest bidder and cared nothing for rules or reputations. Daniel watched them unload, noting the heavy armor, the plasma carbines, the experimental tech. They were good. Too good for the likes of Veric to control for long. The bounty hunters formed ranks, professional and silent, and began sweeping through the ruins with practiced efficiency. Daniel adjusted his plan accordingly. These weren't frightened enforcers he could scatter with smoke and fear. These were apex predators. So he played them against each other instead. As the hunters moved in squads, Daniel planted false signals using hacked authority transponders, creating the illusion of hidden enemy forces deeper in the ruins. He triggered old mining drones to skitter through hallways, drawing gunfire and confusion. He fed encrypted whispers into their comms, messages suggesting betrayal, suggesting that certain units had been bribed to turn against their own. Within 20 minutes, the bounty hunters were firing on each other in the confusion, shouting accusations over scrambled channels. Daniel moved through the chaos like a scalpel, targeting key figures with stunning precision. A trip here, a disabled weapon there, A well-placed distraction that sent squads crashing into each other like blind bulls. Veric, desperate and furious, tried to lead a charge toward the supposed enemy's stronghold. He screamed orders until his throat was raw, but few followed. Those who did barely trusted their own squads anymore, let alone an officer who had proven utterly incompetent against an enemy that hadn't even fired a shot yet. In the smoke and ruin, Daniel captured one of the mercenaries, a wiry scout named Kelv. He stripped the man's gear, planted a tracker in the lining of his uniform, and released him with a whispered warning. "Tell Veric he has 24 hours. After that, the real fun starts." Kelv ran like a man on fire, crashing through the ruins to deliver the message to the surviving officers. Daniel followed at a distance, unseen, using the tracker to map the retreat patterns of the broken authority forces as they abandoned the ruins and stumbled back toward town. By the time the sun rose, the ruins were silent again, empty except for scattered weapons, smoking vehicles, and the lingering echoes of terror. Daniel stood atop one of the broken towers, watching the retreat through the scope of a battered sniper rifle. He didn't fire. There was no need. The enemy wasn't running from bullets. They were running from the idea of him. And that was far more powerful. Back at the town's main square, Veric slammed his fist into the command table, snarling at his remaining officers. He ordered lockdowns, random arrests, threatened executions for cowardice. But it was too late. Word had spread through the town like wildfire. The enforcers weren't invincible. Their ships could be grounded. Their weapons could fail. Their leaders could be humiliated. And somewhere out there, Grave Walker was watching. Daniel didn't celebrate. He didn't smile. There was still work to be done. Veric had made this personal. Hurt Liam. Hurt an entire town just to feel powerful. And soon, very soon, Daniel would make sure that when Veric's fall came, it would be complete, public, and permanent. He slipped back into the shadows as the town buzzed with rumors and fear, setting the final stages of his plan into motion. The real strike, the one that would rip the authorities' stranglehold out by the roots, was already underway. And this time, there would be no mercy. Morning crept over Vespera 9 like a thief, casting long shadows across a town that no longer belonged to the Galactic Authority. The banners hung limp in the square, the ground still scarred from last night's panic, but the gala was being set up anyway. Veric refused to cancel it. He needed a public show of strength. He needed the settlers to see that he was still in control, that Grave Walker was just a ghost story whispered by cowards. The officers marched nervously around the town center, setting up makeshift barricades and scanners while Veric barked threats at anyone who so much as hesitated. Behind the facade of preparation, fear simmered under every helmet. They were trying to hide it, but the whole colony could smell it on them like blood in the water. The civilians gathered slowly, cautiously, forced by law to attend under threat of detention. They clustered in tight groups, whispering, glancing nervously at the rooftops, at the alleys, at the dark windows high above. Somewhere up there, they knew, something was waiting. Daniel watched them gather from a ruined bell tower overlooking the square, his old sniper scope sweeping across the crowd. Every movement was calculated, every angle considered. He wasn't aiming for bloodshed. He was aiming for something much deeper. Fear could be erased. Shame would rot them from the inside. He spoke quietly into his comms unit, the signal bouncing through half a dozen relays before reaching Sarah's console hidden deep in the abandoned industrial sector. She was ready, hands poised over the controls, waiting for the signal. Daniel's thumb hovered over the transmitter. Not yet. Timing was everything. Down in the square, Veric swaggered onto the makeshift stage, his bruised ego wrapped in dress uniform medals and false bravado. He grabbed the mic, his voice booming through the static-filled speakers. "Citizens of Vespera 9, he began, each word sharpened by desperation. "We stand united today against fearmongers and terrorists who would see this colony fall into chaos. We are the law. We are the shield. We are the strength that protects you." Somewhere near the front, a child started to cry. Her mother shushed her quickly, fear lacing every movement. Veric pretended not to notice. He launched into a speech about unity and obedience, about the greatness of the Galactic Authority. It was so pompous, so tone-deaf, Daniel almost smiled. Almost. He waited until Veric began talking about the necessary measures taken to discipline the unruly elements among the settlers, which was authority speak for breaking Liam's body. Then Daniel clicked the transmitter. The square lights dimmed, not fully out, but enough that faces twisted upward in confusion. The massive screens lining the square flickered once, then again, and then, to Veric's horror, they lit up with a grainy video feed. Not propaganda. Not celebration. Footage. Raw, unedited, damning footage. The first clip showed Veric beating the elderly merchant in the square while his men laughed. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Mothers clutched their children tighter. Fathers clenched their fists. Then another clip. Liam, lying broken on the ground. Veric's boot coming down again and again. His sneer as he turned away, uncaring, unpunished. The crowd noise swelled into an ugly roar. Veric shouted into his mic for the feed to be cut, but the technicians, all settlers, simply stepped back and folded their arms. The screens kept rolling. Video after video. Officers stealing supplies meant for the colonists. Mocking injured settlers. Laughing about. Making an example out of the weak ones. And then, worst of all, an intercepted audio recording, broadcast loud and clear for every ear to hear. Veric's own voice, drunk and proud, boasting that earth-born settlers were soft little insects that needed a boot to remember their place. The square erupted. Not in violence, but in something far more dangerous, realization. The authority wasn't protecting them. It wasn't governing them. It was using them. Bleeding them. Humiliating them. The officers shifted nervously, their lines breaking apart under the burning stares of the people they had spent months terrorizing. Some dropped their weapons quietly, slipping away into the alleys. Some froze, paralyzed by the sudden shift in power. Veric stood alone on the stage, shouting threats, but the words had no teeth anymore. Daniel moved quickly. He ghosted down the tower's inner stairwell, stepping into the square just as the first settlers pushed past the barricades. He didn't need to rally them. Their anger had already found a voice. He only needed to make sure it didn't spiral into chaos. He slipped through the crowd, unseen, until he reached the stage. Veric spotted him too late. By the time he reached for his weapon, Daniel's hand was already closing around his wrist, twisting it up and back with brutal efficiency. The microphone clattered to the stage floor. There was no grand fight. No last stand. Veric whimpered like a kicked dog, eyes wide with terror, as Daniel leaned close and whispered so quietly that only he could hear. "You broke my son's bones," Daniel said, his voice as calm as a winter grave. "I'm going to break everything you think you are." Daniel hauled him upright by the collar and turned to face the crowd. In one clean, practiced motion, he stripped Veric of his badge, his sidearm, his authority insignias. He tossed them into the dirt at the officers' feet, where the settlers could trample them into the mud. Then he forced Veric to his knees. No blood. No broken bones. Just humiliation. Total. Irreversible. "You want justice?" Daniel said to the crowd, his voice carrying across the square without the need for microphones. "Or do you want revenge?" For a moment, it seemed the crowd might surge forward, tear Veric apart with their bare hands. But then an old woman, the same merchant who had been beaten weeks ago, stepped forward. She looked down at Veric, broken and pitiful, and then she looked at the other settlers. "We want him gone," she said. "Gone so he can't touch another soul." The settlers murmured in agreement, the anger folding into something heavier, more righteous. Exile. Permanent, total exile. Daniel nodded once. He jerked Veric to his feet and shoved him toward the open desert beyond the colony walls, where no aid station or patrol would find him. Where the sun and the sands would be his only companions. As Veric stumbled away, alone and stripped of everything that had once made him powerful, Daniel caught Liam's eyes from across the square. His son, battered but healing, stood supported by a pair of townsfolk, watching with a small, fierce pride that Daniel would carry to his grave. Daniel didn't stay for the celebrations. He slipped away before the settlers could turn their gratitude into speeches. His work here was done. Vespera 9 would heal without him. Liam would grow strong without needing to live under the shadow of Gravewalker. As the sun rose higher, casting long gold rays over the reborn town, Daniel disappeared into the desert, leaving behind only whispered legends and a battered authority too scared to ever return. Gravewalker had come out of hiding, and the galaxy would not forget it again. The desert stretched out before Daniel in endless, shimmering waves, a vast emptiness that swallowed noise and memory alike. His boots crunched softly over the hard-packed sand as he walked, no destination in mind, only the instinct to keep moving, to stay ahead of the ripples he had unleashed. Vespera 9 would rebuild now, stronger and freer, but there would be consequences. The Galactic Authority didn't forgive humiliation, not on this scale. Somewhere, in some polished office orbiting a core world, reports were already being written, investigations launched, bounties whispered. They would come looking. They would dig through the wreckage of their broken enforcers and find the name that still made hardened generals uneasy: Gravewalker. Daniel accepted that. It was the price for what he had done. The price for what had been done to Liam. He paused atop a rocky outcrop, scanning the horizon. Far behind him, he could just make out the faint glimmer of the colony, a small stubborn stain of life against the desert's endless hunger. He allowed himself a moment to breathe, to feel the morning sun warm his scarred skin, to listen to the clean, empty silence. No sirens. No screaming. Just wind and stone and the steady thud of his own heartbeat. He wasn't the same man who had first come to this colony years ago, looking for peace. That man had believed he could outgrow the things he had seen, the things he had done. That he could bury his skills deep enough that they would never rise again. But life had a way of unearthing what you thought was dead and forcing you to look it in the eye. A soft beep sounded from the old operations tablet tucked into his pack, dragging him from his thoughts. He frowned, pulling it free and flipping open the screen. A transmission request blinked back at him, encrypted with an old code he hadn't seen in years. Curiosity prickled at the edges of his mind. Only a handful of people still alive would know how to reach him this way. Against his better judgment, he keyed the receiver. The face that appeared on the cracked hollow screen was older, lined with battle scars and silvered hair, but unmistakable. General Alaric Shaw, the man who had once commanded Earth's deadliest operatives, Daniel among them. For a moment either spoke. The weight of years and broken oaths hung between them like smoke. Finally, Shaw broke the silence with a dry chuckle. "I see retirement suits you, Cross," he said, voice rough as gravel. "Or it did until about a week ago." Daniel said nothing, waiting. "You made quite the mess," Shaw continued, glancing down at something off-screen. 27 disciplinary reports, 17 filed grievances, and 1 complete colony revolt. Not bad for a guy who supposedly died 10 years ago. Daniel's lips twitched into something that wasn't quite a smile. "I didn't start it," he said simply. Shaw leaned back, studying him with shrewd, weary eyes. "No," he admitted. "But you finished it. And now everyone's paying attention. Vespera 9 isn't just a blip on a forgotten map anymore. It's a symbol. Earthborn colonists standing up to authority thugs. You're a folk hero now, whether you like it or not." Daniel grunted, folding his arms across his chest. "Not interested in hero worship." "Doesn't matter what you're interested in," Shaw said. "The galaxy's changing. Faster than anyone predicted. Authority control is slipping in the fringe systems. Rebellions are popping up like brush fires. People need hope. They need legends." Daniel shook his head, a flicker of old exhaustion running through him. "I'm not a symbol. I'm a man who wanted to protect his son." "And you did," Shaw said quietly. "But you also lit a fuse. You can't walk away from that." For a long time, Daniel stared out across the desert. He thought about Liam, still healing but already stronger, already braver. He thought about the settlers standing in that square, choosing exile over bloodshed. He thought about the children who would grow up in a town free of authority Boothiels because one man refused to stay buried. Maybe he hadn't intended to start a war. Maybe he hadn't wanted to be anything more than a father. But sometimes the world decided for you. "What do you want, Shaw?" he asked finally. Shaw's expression hardened. "There's a network forming. Ex-operatives. Ex-soldiers. Civilians who remember what freedom tastes like. It's early, fragile, but it's growing. We could use you, Cross. Not as a killer. As a protector. As a symbol." Daniel exhaled slowly. He had spent so long running from titles, from responsibilities, from the heavy chains of expectation. But maybe it was time to stop running. Maybe it was time to pick up the mantle again, not because someone ordered him to, but because it was right. "Not yet," he said. Shaw nodded, as if he had expected nothing less. "When you're ready." The transmission cut out, leaving Daniel alone with the rising sun and the endless horizon. He packed the tablet away, slinging his worn pack over his shoulder. He didn't know where he would go next. Maybe deeper into the frontier, where authority hands grew weak and desperate settlers clung to whatever hope they could find. Maybe he would follow the quiet rumors of resistance cells forming in the mining worlds. Or maybe he would simply walk, one step at a time, until he found a place where his skills could do more good than harm. As he started down the far side of the ridge, the wind picked up, scattering sand across his tracks almost as soon as he made them, erasing the evidence of his passing, just as it always had. But this time, Daniel didn't mind. He wasn't trying to disappear. Not completely. Not anymore. Behind him, the town of Vesper 9 stood firm against the desert's hunger, a small stubborn beacon of hope in a galaxy that had almost forgotten how to fight for itself. And somewhere inside that town, a boy named Liam was healing, growing stronger, carrying forward the lessons his father had taught him. Be strong. Be smart. Never give up. Daniel Cross walked into the rising sun, a shadow stretching long behind him, a living reminder that some ghosts refused to stay buried. Gravewalker had returned to the world. And the world would never be the same again,